on this issue of Epstein, I'm curious your thoughts here, because we've seen it break through, because we've seen Shane Gillis talk about this at the ESPYs, and we've seen all of these podcasters talk about it, and my friends and families who are not political, they understand what's going on.
Same.
Do you think that this has staying power, or, I mean, we still are in a news cycle that moves very quickly.
Yes.
This has been a month-long story. Is this going to be the kind of thing that sticks around, or that will eventually dissipate like everything else does?
In this video, Mehdi Hasan stuns Brian Tyler Cohen with some brutal truth bombs. So Brian kicks things off with a pretty real question. Is the Epstein story actually gonna stick? Or is it just another flash in the pan here? And like, it's not a bad take. When people outside the political bubble, comedians, podcasters, and even your random uncle just start bringing it up, that usually means it's cutting through the noise. But then Mehdi comes in and man, he just lays it down. No sugarcoating, no fake optimism. He basically says, yeah, this is probably gonna fade. Not because people don't care, but because the outrage is just being controlled. It's being steered, manipulated, and eventually just shut down. And that's where it really starts to snowball. He won't just talk about Epstein here. He goes straight into how Trump's base operates like a cult. How MAGA loyalty just overrides truth. And how Democrats still don't get to play the long game. Meanwhile, Republicans are out here flooding the media with noise and keeping scandals alive on command, while the left just kinda waits for things to work themselves out. So yeah, make sure to watch till the end to see how Mehdi Hasan stuns Brian Tyler Cohen with some brutal truth bombs.
The cynic in me says the latter. It will eventually dissipate. I hope I'm wrong. This is the first Trump scandal which was driven by Trump voters, not by Democrats.
Yeah.
It's so funny when you see Trump in the Oval Office saying, was it yesterday, today? I've lost track of days, where he was asked by a reporter about Epstein, and he says, oh, this is just a Democratic hoax. This is pushed by the Democrats. I wish.
Yeah.
Democrats have come very late to the party. They're rightly being accused of hypocrisy by Republicans who are like, I see Democratic members talk about Epstein, and then some Republican in the replies says, you never said anything about Epstein until 2025. And it's like, probably true, but I'm glad they're saying it now.
Yeah.
At least they've realized the salience of this issue. But look, this was driven by Republicans. Trump cynically, Trump, Vance and co, they cynically use this to get their base out, to get their base worked up and enraged. And now they can't deliver on it, or they won't deliver on it. And I don't know. I mean, I'm torn on this one. On the one hand, there's enough anecdotal evidence to suggest that parts of the base are still furious about this, are still angry at Trump, have not let it go. But then the polling shows Trump hasn't really taken a dent at all in his approval ratings from his base. So I don't know. And you see people like Charlie Kirk, and I see you've been mocking him online, being a very good boy and telling Donald Trump that I'll do, I trust Trump. He told me not to talk about it, so I'm not talking about it. And Dinesh D'Souza and a bunch of others, right-wing influencers, we trust the White House. Time to move on. Now, whether the base moves on as well, I don't know. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one person who has refused to move on, is still causing a bit of a stir on some of this stuff. But I think in general, like, if I believe the Trump movement, the MAGA movement is a cult, which I do believe, then I have to also believe that they will fall along with this. I mean, I interviewed Mick Mulvaney recently. He did make a good point that, look, Donald Trump came out and said publicly a couple months back, MAGA is what I say it is, right? And the Epstein story is a test of that claim. Right? Because if he's right, then they will move on. And Epstein is no longer an issue for the MAGA base. If he's wrong, then MAGA is beyond Trump. But they say, no. Epstein and pedophile scandals and QAnon is key to who we are. I do think, again, Democrats have to keep pushing this. The media still have to start asking questions. What the left and liberals don't seem to understand, which the right understands, is these scandals, these controversies, this is not organic. This doesn't just happen spontaneously. You need people to be pushing it, right? Especially for the media. We often say, you and I will rightly say, oh, New York Times isn't covering this story. It's not on its front page. But to be fair to New York Times, the New York Times needs kind of quote unquote permission to do that. And the way they get permission to do that in our system is they need a senior Democratic politician to hold a press conference and ask questions, or hold a hearing in Congress. Then,
I mean, you look at how Jim Jordan and James Comer, they give endless supply, endless oxygen to their insane conspiracy theory.
Yeah, Fox doesn't operate in isolation. It's all coordinated. And the Democrats don't understand that. But I see a lot of, especially on the blue skies, a lot of liberal Democratic parties will say, oh, the media is just ignoring the story. And I'm not defending the media. I'm the last person to defend mainstream media. But you also have to ask questions about the Democratic Party. If the leadership of the party is not pushing this at the same time, it allows the media to move on. So you do need your Chris Murphys and your Brian Schatz and others to keep bringing this stuff up. Not just Epstein, but the multiple other scandals that are going on.
Right.
So Mehdi doesn't waste any time sugarcoating things here, and honestly, it's kind of refreshing. He's like, look, this Epstein scandal, It's not going to survive unless people actively keep it alive. And that's the gut punch most folks don't want to hear. This isn't some organic story that'll magically stay in the news because it's important. It only sticks if it's strategically pushed. Mehdi's calling out not just the MAGA cult dynamic, but also the complete failure of Democrats to understand narrative warfare. And he's right, this entire cycle was kicked off by Trump supporters themselves, not the left. And that's what makes it so different. But even after all the noise, Trump's approval barely moves. Why? Because the ecosystem around him, people like Charlie Kirk and Dinesh D'Souza, basically tell the base when it's time to forget. It's straight up narrative obedience. They're out here saying Trump said we're done talking about it, and poof, the outrage just vanishes. But here's the thing Mehdi nails. This is a test of whether MAGA follows Trump or whether MAGA is bigger than Trump now. And that's actually a really scary thought if you step back. Because if the base refuses to let go of Epstein, even after Trump tries to bury it, then Trump might not be in control anymore. And yeah, maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene is still howling in the wind. But that doesn't mean it'll lead anywhere if the rest of the machine just shuts it down.
Take one other scandal, the plane from Qatar that he's now spending $1 billion secret dollars that they put in a budget when no one was looking to retrofit this plane that he's going to take with him into his private life. Like that, again, if the media doesn't cover that going forward, you still have to, again, I'm sorry, blame politicians. We need Democratic Party politicians talking about this all the time in every media hit they do, bringing up Trump's corruption, bringing up the examples of corruption, saying, let's not move on. I can't believe we've moved on from January the 6th. That kills me. That should be the center of every Democrat who goes on television should begin every interview saying Donald Trump pardoned 1,600 criminals, 1,600 rioters, 600 of whom attacked police officers. Like that should just be something you say at the beginning of every interview.
There is something we can learn from Donald Trump in terms of repetition of his message over and over and over again until it's seared in the cerebral cortexes of everybody who is 100%. Listening. And he repeats this stuff so frequently that it has to be in the news because that's what he's spoken about that day. I think there's this sense of like, okay, I want to treat my audience, speak to my audience at the height of their intelligence and not repeat something I've already said to them. But the reality is that, first of all, most people aren't listening. And second of all, you have the ability as an elected official to drive the conversation. And so use every opportunity, limited though they may be, to drive the conversation in the way that you want it to be driven. And you're exactly right. This stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just going to, I think there's this sense that like we can all wait for this to just stay in the news, but we have agency here. We're in charge of making sure that it stays in the news. So
by the way, quick point. Peter Mandelson, who was Tony Blair's main spin doctor, main advisor, helped create New Labour, the 3 election victories in the 90s and 2000s. He had a line, which I put in my book about debate. He talked about repetition. You, as a politician, only when you get bored yourself of saying your message, are you even halfway towards where you need to be in message.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, how many times has Trump said, build the wall, lock her up, make America great again? There's a reason that we remember all of this stuff. There's a reason that people, even the people who have been duped, who have been gullible enough to fall for his bill of goods, that they think that's what he stands for is because he says it so many times. On the point of the media, we have seen, to switch topics here, we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu suggest that he's going to look into waging a defamation lawsuit against the New York Times for reporting about starvation in Gaza. Can I have your reaction to that?
Good luck is what I would say. Good luck with that. It's an insane position. It's interesting how many foreign politicians are now coming to sue people in the US. I know the Macrons are suing Candace Owens. The US famously was a place where you couldn't sue people, right? The First Amendment. I come from the UK, which is libel tourism home, right? That's where you go to sue people as the UK, because the courts are very friendly to the plaintiffs, not to the defendants. In the US, it's supposed to defend a free press. Let's see. Obviously, we've been seeing a very authoritarian attack on our free speech and on the First Amendment. Look, he's doing this to distract from what everyone knows, which is that the Israeli government is carrying out a genocide in Gaza. We just published a poll today, Brian, from Data for Progress, which shows that Americans by a 14-point margin say what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. This is no longer a debate. The American public believes it's a genocide. The top genocide scholars in the world believe it's a genocide. The International Court of Justice continues to investigate Israel for a genocide. And the Israelis keep saying genocidal things. So good luck, Benjamin Netanyahu suing the New York Times. That'll be a great bit of discovery that goes on there. Although I would say they don't need to do any discovery. What's hidden in Netanyahu's emails that they haven't said publicly? Every member of the Israeli government has said something genocidal at some point or another over the last year and a half. The heritage minister, Brian, said last week that we're gonna take over Gaza and make it Jewish again. These are the words of the heritage minister last week. The settlements minister said, we don't care about the hostages. Not about the hostages. It's about taking back Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu himself has talked about the Palestinians being Amalek, which is biblical code for kill everyone, including the donkeys and the children. So the stuff from the Israeli government has been horrific. It is one of the great tragedies in American history and one of the great stains on both our political parties that two presidents, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, gave Benjamin Netanyahu pretty much everything he wanted. And Biden did that disastrous hug him close strategy. We hug Bibi and then he'll do what we want him to do. He did not. In fact, Benjamin Netanyahu used Biden, got everything he wanted out of Biden, $17 billion of weapons. And then he openly just counted down the clock to get Trump, so he'd get even more from Trump. And by the way, Donald Trump was asked yesterday, what do you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to take over the entire Gaza Strip? And he said, well, it's up to Israel to do what they want to do. No, it's not. We fund Israel. We fund Israel. We have a right to say no.
So Mehdi's firing on all cylinders here. He calls out the fact that Trump quietly slipped billions into the budget to retrofit a luxury plane, like it's his personal ride into post-presidency, and nobody's talking about it. That should be everywhere, but it's not. Why? Because as Mehdi points out, if Democrats don't repeat it constantly, the media just lets it die. Trump figured that out ages ago. Say it enough times, loud enough, and it sticks, whether it's lock her up or build the wall. And Brian nails something hard here. He admits that repetition works. It's not about dumbing things down, it's about hammering the message so nobody can ignore it. Most people aren't tuned in 24/7. You can say something once and move on, it's gone. You want corruption to stick in people's minds, you make it stick, over and over. Then Mehdi pivots into Netanyahu's latest stunt, threatening to sue the New York Times for reporting on starvation in Gaza. And yeah, he wrecks the idea in like 2 seconds. Good luck with that, because really, when you've got Israeli ministers literally calling to make Gaza Jewish again, and quoting biblical kill everyone passages, suing journalists just screams desperation. They're not hiding genocide, they're basically saying it out loud at this point.
You know, that strategy of hugging these politicians in hopes that they'll reciprocate this goodwill is a recurring theme in the Democratic Party. I mean, it's what we so often do to confer goodwill onto the other side, and maybe they'll reciprocate. I'm curious what your reaction was to the Bernie Sanders amendment blocking arms sales to Israel garnered, I think, record support among the Democratic caucus in the Senate. Still, obviously not enough to pass, but some of these even longtime pro-Israel hawks decided to vote in favor of that amendment. Can I have your reaction to that?
I was stunned. I was actually in a debate which our mutual friend Tommy Vito was moderating on Crooked with Jeremy Ben-Ami, the head of J Street, the Liberal Zionist group. And Jeremy was saying, look, Democrats are shifting. And I was like, there's not going to be a majority. And he said, yes, they will. And to be fair to Jeremy, they did get a majority of Senate Democrats for one or two of the bills. Remember, there were two votes, Brian. One was on offensive weapons and bombs. The other one was on assault rifles. And some people like Ossoff, I think, voted on rifles, yes, but not on bombs. But anyways, it was symbolically an important vote. Is it as many as I would like to see? No. By the way, we should remind everyone, every single Republican voter who was there, every single Republican senator present voted to send arms to Israel. I have been very critical of the Democratic Party's record on Gaza, on Israel, on Netanyahu. You heard me just criticize Joe Biden. Having said that, never forget the Republicans are worse. And we see that in these votes. At least some Democrats in the House and Senate are willing to take a stand for human rights, for justice, for American law, Brian. I should remind everyone, sending arms to Israel right now is a violation of two separate U.S. laws, the Leahy law, which the former senator from Vermont, Patrick Leahy, passed, which means you can't send weapons, American weapons, to a military that's clearly involved in human rights abuses. That's the Leahy law. The other law is the Foreign Assistance Act, which says you can't send weapons to a country that is blocking American aid, which again, Israel is doing in Gaza. So I would like to see every Senate Democrat come out and vote against these weapons. Sadly, the likes of Cory Booker just won't do it. John Fetterman has become this kind of pro-genocide ghoul who some of us are counting down the clock to be primaried. Sadly, he's got a lot more years in the Senate. Never has there been a bigger bait and switch, a bigger fraud, a bigger liar in the Democratic Party than John Fetterman. I'm ashamed to say I supported John Fetterman's Senate candidacy and Senate run. I defended him against Republican attacks on his health after he was elected to the Senate. And And here he is cheering on a genocide happily every day. So I think there are a lot of Senate Democrats who still behave in a shameful way. But I'm glad many of them are following Bernie's lead. And credit to Bernie Sanders for leading on this issue for the last decade. But not a single Republican, not a single. In the House, Thomas Massie, yes. Marjorie Taylor Greene amazingly came out on the right side of something for once. But in the Senate, not a single one. They're all pro-genocide in the Republican Senate.
So yeah, Brian raised that glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things are shifting. But Mehdi shuts the door fast. He's like, look, even if some Democrats stepped up, the bar is still down. And it's wild that someone like John Fetterman, someone Mehdi literally defended in the past, has now flipped into full-on cheerleader mode for what many are calling a genocide. That kind of betrayal, it just stings harder when it comes from your own side. And yet Mehdi still makes space to give Bernie credit, not just for this moment, but for years of consistency. Because let's be real, leadership isn't just about votes, it's about moral clarity when it counts. And while the Senate GOP goes full pro-genocide with zero shame, it's on Democrats to break that silence. The laws are clear, the stakes are deadly, but the voices, it's just still too few. And that's what makes this so frustrating, because the outrage is there. The public is waking up, but without political force behind it, it just fizzles. And the worst part, when silence wins, it starts to sound like consensus. And when complicity becomes the default, it just stops looking like bias. It just becomes something way darker. And speaking of bias,
are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.